I think well, you tell me, I think it's fair to say there were no huge shocks in this white paper.
No, it was pretty well trailed what we saw today.
It was. The one area where people are screaming out for more to be done is in the area of advertising. You know, betting company advertising is massive on all of our sports and cable TV channels. I know the Premier League have said from the season 25-26 they won't have gambling logos and insignia on their shirts. That's voluntary. But you could also argue that the money that goes into a variety of sports directly, horse racing and many others, that if you actually attack gambling too much, you might damage football, you might damage horse racing. Where's the balance here?
Well, I mean, regulation is always about finding a balance between consumer protection and freedom. And I think where advertising and sponsorships are concerned, you're right, some of these sponsorship controls packages can be very important to respective sports, not just horse racing, rugby league, darts and others. I think the second thing to note is that banning advertising is a form of censorship. And as a liberal society, we should always be very, very careful about what we decide to censor. Mm-hmm. Third, the research on advertising suggests, yes, it can have quite a bad impact on people who are in recovery from gambling disorder. So people trying to abstain from gambling, advertising can be unhelpful for them.
But that would apply to any other product.
Yes, it would apply if your problem is beer or if your problem is overeating or other things. So it's not a reason to censor. The other thing is we're now in a situation in this digital age where we have the technology that allows us to put in place blocks. So the technology exists to allow people, if they don't want to view certain ads, the technology exists to take that out. And where we need to be pushing forwards in society is intelligent solutions. But there will always be people who just want to ban things because of a lack of imagination or simply a moral view about the sinfulness of the activity.
Yeah, and that applies across many, many fields. With the growth of online gambling, so this proposal in the white paper is that 18 to 24-year-olds should be treated differently to everybody else with a lower stake allowed to be put online. I mean, this is nannying that is beyond belief, isn't it? I mean, Dan...
Well, I think it's like a lot of things, Nigel. There is some kernel of logic at the centre of it, and we do know that younger males in particular, not really younger females, but younger males do tend to be at greater risk of gambling disorder, but that is true across a lot of mental health conditions. So there is a logic to it, but at the same time, if you're 18, you're an adult, and you deserve respect in the law to be an adult. And I think it's worth thinking about this as potentially the thin end of two particular wedges. The first is that as the Gambling Commission has now described younger adults as vulnerable, automatically vulnerable. But this is insulting and demeaning to the vast majority of young adults in our country. Yes, and it extends further than that. So the Gambling Commission also describes older adults as vulnerable. It describes people with dyslexia as vulnerable. It describes people as vulnerable if they have poor literacy or numeracy skills. It describes them as vulnerable...
What an arrogant group of people they sound like.
Yes, well, I mean, the Gambling Commission has proposed creating maps of low IQ in local authorities.
Dear, oh dear.
This is what we're faced with these days.
Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Let's say I'm a bookmaker, you know, and I've got my shop and I've got my regular punters that come in physically or they've got online accounts with me. What this proposes, and some of this has been happening already, but if anybody gambles more than £1,000 in one bet or £2,000 over the course of a few months, that somehow I've got to stop taking their money. I then, if they want to put a big bet on, have to check the source of the money. How do I run a bookmaking business if I've got to put in place that level of control and checks?
Well, the uncomfortable truth is it's already happening because the Gambling Commission is already coercing bookmakers to put in controls, actually at lower levels than what the government's talked about today. So in a way, I think the industry is pleased to see some sort of legitimate, open controls here, rather than sort of backdoor coercion from the regulator.
If a punter wants to put a fair-sized bet, a four-figure bet on something, it is today very hard to do.
Yes.
Very hard to do. Yeah. But actually it's not, is it? Because there are illegal bookmakers, which of course flourished before 1963 when we didn't have any betting shops in the country. But also, I can go offshore. There are all sorts of betting houses that I can go to in the European time zone and elsewhere. So isn't the effect of this that people will still want to gamble? There's a danger that you push young people into a black criminal market, and other gamblers leave the British betting industry and go overseas.
That's certainly a risk. And I think one of the success stories of British gambling legislation in the last 20 years has been actually that the black market has been relatively small in this country, certainly by comparison with France, for example, or some of the Scandinavian countries. There is absolutely a risk that tighter regulation, particularly if it's not targeted at addressing the specific problem we're after, may lead to many recreational gamblers taking their trade elsewhere. And there are signs that the black market is growing from a relatively small base. And at the moment, the regulatory action against these black market operators is really to write them letters to say, please don't do this. And that's not a very comforting, it's not comforting to say that the regulator seems to have this under control. On
balance, Dan Waugh, overall, looking at these proposals, how many marks out of 10 would you give it?
I think, the DCMS has put together a pretty coherent set of proposals. I think I would give it an 8 out of 10. I think there's some good work here. There are some issues, but the most worrying thing is a lot of this now gets kicked to consultation, and a lot of it will be implemented by the regulator. So it will happen outside of parliamentary scrutiny, and the regulator's track record on these consultations is not very strong. So I think the devil will be in the detail, and we'll see over the coming months. OK.